As someone who never likes to leave something unfinished, I have to admit I had the hint of a sour taste in my mouth after I published my monster of a video covering Supreme Commander, and the story of its creator Chris Taylor. Not because I hadn't done the series justice, or that I wasn't happy with the final product, because I was. No, the reason was something else entirely, something that clearly wasn't lost on any of you. There was a part of the story that I hadn't shone a light on. Despite starting at Total Annihilation and going up to and including Chris's current projects, I didn't talk about the spiritual successor to both that game and to Supreme Commander, Planetary Annihilation. And there was a good reason for that. I wanted to keep the video focused on Chris and his endeavours, and while Planetary Annihilation shares a lot of the same heritage as Supreme Commander, it's more of a distant cousin than a direct sibling. So that's why this video exists. And now you can all stop asking me in the comments why I didn't mention Planetary Annihilation. Thanks. And while as the title suggests this is in fact a review, it's also a mini retrospective, in the same vein as the one that came before it. A spiritual successor, if you will. So strap in, get your commanders ready, and let's take a look at the game many people, its developers included, consider to be the modern day successor to Total Annihilation, and even Supreme Commander. Planetary Annihilation began its life back in 2012, revealed to the world via Kickstarter by Uber Entertainment, a small indie team made up of a group of talented developers from all walks of gaming. But the most notable members of Uber were undoubtedly part of the reason the game garnered the level of enthusiasm it did on its reveal, those being Chief Technical Officer and Creative Lead John Maver and Art Director Steve Thompson. Both were veteran RTS developers and both held high-level positions on the teams for Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander, so you can see why fans of those series were excited. And people weren't just projecting their hopes onto the project either. Uber knew the market they were catering and the talent they had, and within 2 lines of the Kickstarter description they'd already said how they're aiming to build on Total Annihilation's gameplay. So after a very successful campaign and 2 years of test builds, updates and live streams, Planetary Annihilation was released, and the response was, well, probably not what people were hoping. Due to things like technical issues, UI complaints, a lack of tutorials, not being able to save your game, and more, Planetary Annihilation had somewhat of an icky launch. People agreed that there was likely a good RTS buried in there somewhere, but for most it wouldn't be worth the hassle of all its drawbacks. So Uber went to work on fixing its many issues, and in 2015, 1 year after the game's original release, turned out a new product, Planetary Annihilation TITANS. Coming with a number of key changes like huge new Titan class units, new mechanics, a tutorial, new terrain, and a host of other improvements, the new game was in a much better state than before. But unfortunately people weren't too happy with the fact that unless you were a Kickstarter backer, you had to pay for this update. Granted, there was a 66% discount offered for those who owned the base game, but a lot of people still considered the original game to be broken or incomplete, and seeing the developers release a paid, standalone title instead of just updating the original was not something fans were that keen on. Anyway, that's effectively irrelevant now, so let's put all that behind us and see where we're at today in 2019. Okay, so the original release of Planetary Annihilation is no longer available. You can't buy it or play it unless you owned it already before its removal in August of 2018. TITANS is the only one you can purchase, and it's the de facto way to play, despite the fact that both versions are still being updated concurrently and have continued to see welcome changes and additions made over the last few years. I was surprised to see that even now they're still receiving updates, which seems to have been made possible by the way of a developer change, now Planetary Annihilation Inc. rather than Uber Entertainment. And no, that's not just the company changing names, which is what I thought originally. No, apparently some of the original team as well as long-time community contributors formed this new company and are now carrying the torch forward. It's unclear to me who did or didn't move to the new studio, but it does look like John Maver is still with Uber if his LinkedIn is anything to go by, which means his tenure on Planetary Annihilation has unfortunately come to an end. Alright, so now you're all caught up, so let's get into TITANS itself and the state it's in today, and see how it holds up to that original Kickstarter promise of being an innovative spin on what RTS games can and should be. Planetary Annihilation Titans is set in a universe where all that exists are robots. And all they exist to do is bat until the end of time. And that's everything you need to know to get up to date with the backstory. No good guys, no bad guys, no narrative, no problem, is the proclamation of Planetary Annihilations. Just good old fashioned rock'em sock'em robot fighting across potentially multiple planets, moons and asteroids. Presentation wise, there's a very clear connection to Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander. The use of a singular commander unit with a ton of self-replicating robots under its thrall has been inherited, as well as the blocky nature of everything, and of course the cute names of the little robots. Oh, it's an ant! But without a doubt, the main differentiator here is in the scope of its battlegrounds. The concept of having multiple celestial bodies on a single map is a captivating idea, and the scale of which you're fighting is pretty awe-inspiring. Each planet acts as its own map, with an array of different biomes and procedurally generated terrain, and they look great no matter if you're zoomed all the way in or all the way out. And I have to say, seeing your units and buildings become tiny specks of nothingness as you go farther and farther out to reveal the entire planet and eventually an entire solar system is pretty cool. The scale is easily the main pull of the game's presentation, because the art style itself really is quite simplistic. While some things like buildings, the commander, and most Titan units are designed thoughtfully with very effective and clean minimalist design and animations, I feel some things go a little bit too far in that direction. For example, a lot of the smaller units are basically just a few blocks arranged like a tank or whatnot, which I guess is fine because there's often hundreds of them on screen, or you can see how their icons anyway, but even some of the larger units leave a little bit to be desired. And let me be clear, a simplistic art style isn't a bad thing, obviously, far from it. But the problem I have is exacerbated tremendously by the lack of any factions, which means every player has the same pool of units to deploy, same buildings to construct, and the same late game titans to unleash. And all of this leads to a game that's sorely lacking in any personality, which I guess is appropriate when all of your units are emotionless machines anyway. It's lucky that the lighting, explosions, and overall visual effects are really good, because battles between the same units against bases with the same buildings do get pretty boring to look at pretty fast.
Enemy command detected. Enemy command damaged. Enemy command destroyed. System is now.
That being said, damn does Planetary Annihilation have some spectacle to show off. All you need to do is destroy an enemy commander, nuke a moon, or send an asteroid into a planet, and you'll see what I mean.
Terrestrial planet annihilated.
Switching gears, let's talk about the game's sound design for a sec, which is really all it needs. While none of it's particularly offensive, nothing really made me stand up or take any notice. The effects are serviceable, the soundtrack's fine, but it's quite repetitive, and obviously there's no voice acting because everyone's a robot. Everything just feels like a standard sci-fi fare, and I would rate it fine. It does the job, but it's nothing to write home about. When getting into a game of Planetary Annihilation, you might get an odd feeling of a deja vu. Yes, that's a commander, yes, that's electricity and metal, yes, those are construction bots, yes, that's... Okay, I'll stop there. But you get what I mean. Planetary Annihilation plays a lot like the games it's inspired from, mainly Total Annihilation. There's really just one game mode, which is Skirmish. There is a Galactic War single-player mode, but honestly it's just skirmish missions tied together with this really basic overworld map, so we're just going to skip that one and just focus on the core way to play. You can obviously play multiplayer with the AI or real people, or a mix of the two. Here's a rundown of the basics. There's two resources together which use a streaming system inherited from Total Annihilation, meaning that you get a certain amount of resources per second. Making a unit or building a building uses a certain amount of those resources per second, so it's up to you to manage your in and out to make sure you've got a constant supply without using too much. The goal is to destroy the enemy commander, and doing so means instant victory, so you don't have to worry about cleaning up any struggling enemy units or anything like that. And like I said earlier, depending on the map, this can take place across multiple planets, meaning you'll potentially have to manage a small handful of different bases and outposts all at the same time. You'll also need to manage different combat layers. There's the expected ground and air, but because of the game's scale, there's also orbital, so you can build satellites, construction yards, spaceships, etc. So yes, there's a lot going on. And to be honest, when you've got all that going on across multiple planets, it can often become overwhelming. To the game's credit, it does employ some smart features to help this, like this handy picture-in-picture mode, but for me it still doesn't alleviate the issue entirely. Planetary Annihilation is very much a game about doing everything at once at all times. Constantly growing your economy, managing armies, fighting the enemy, etc. And despite appearances, the game actually plays very fast. Even the largest units and buildings can be destroyed really in seconds, and nearly everything can be built quickly providing you have the resources. And because there's no research or upgrade system and there's only 2 tech levels, it's usually not long before you're deploying really the best units in the game. It's less micromanagement and more macro management. Armies feel like blobs of coloured icons rather than coherent forces of specific units, and if yours is bigger, it's probably going to win the day. And while of course there are finer tactics and strategies to implement in how you build up your forces and what win condition you want to pursue overall, Planetary Annihilation often feels like it's less about outsmarting your opponent and more about just being faster and more efficient than them. I mean, the game gives you an actions per minute result at the end of matches. If that's not telling, I don't know what is. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying this is badly done. It's just really not what I'm into. I'd rather be in the thick of the action, managing my army of veteran units, duking it out in something like Supreme Commander, rather than just hoping my blob of colour stays bigger than yours. I'd all can expect when I talked about the game lacking in personality. I don't feel connected to any of this. I don't care about my units, my bases, my commander, none of it, because there's no investment and there's no diversity. If I lose this army of units that all look the same to an enemy army of units that all look the same, I'll just make another one, except this time I'll build more. No faction options, no upgrade paths, no choices. The lack of diversity is a massive issue for me because every game just feels exactly the same, with the only difference being how many players you have and how many planets. At least there's the Legion mod, which adds a second faction to the mix, and while it does feel similar with a comparable lineup of unit classes and building types, the variety it added was much appreciated. And finally, at least there was some visual distinction to be had between me and my opponents. Although I've definitely been somewhat negative on Planetary Annihilation throughout this video, I actually don't think it's a bad game. Far from it. It's mechanically sound, well executed, and it looks pretty great. It's just not the game for me, and not what I want from an RTS. Like many of you out there I'm sure, I don't claim to be an excellent strategy game player. Hell, I'm probably pretty average. But I just don't play these games to get the highest actions per minute or to beat my opponent in the most efficient way possible. I play for the fun of making cool bases and having awesome looking battles and deploying unique units and maybe pulling off a fun strategy or two. Planetary Annihilation just doesn't give me enough variety, and that's really what it comes down to. Sure, blowing up a planet is awesome, don't get me wrong, and yes, making the massive Titan units are really cool, but the lack of factions, upgrade paths, research trees, and unit diversity is something I just really don't like. I enjoy the uncertainty of RTS matches, to be unsure of what's going to happen next, to have every game feel unique. And that's just not something I've got from playing Planetary Annihilation. If you don't mind so much about these things and just prefer the flat out gameplay, then maybe this will be your next big game. But for me, I'll be sticking with Supreme Commander for a while longer yet. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Man, well, finally at the end of the script. I'm going a bit of a ramble here, but for some reason I just had a lot of trouble writing this one. It took probably twice as long as a normal script would take to write. It's not even the longest I've ever done, not by far. Just for some reason it just took a while. I got quite sick, so I couldn't really write. I didn't have really any desire to do work even though I had to. And yeah, it was just found it difficult to write, but I'm glad I got it there. I'm pretty happy with it in the end. So I hope you guys like the video, and I'm sorry this video took a bit longer as well. I was hoping to have this out a few days earlier, so anyway, I hope the wait was worth it. Thank you all again so much for watching. Please check out my Twitter if you want to follow me for updates. That's where I post on statuses of the videos, when I go live, random tweets, stuff like that, so check that out. We also have my Twitch channel where I'm live 5 days a week, so 2 PM Pacific, 5 PM Eastern. I stream Gwent, the Witcher card game, 5 days a week, and also play a single-player RPG afterwards. So right now we're playing through Dark Souls, so I encourage you to go check us out over there. And lastly, we have the community Discord, where we have a ton of great people, where you play RTSs. I did play with some of them for this video. Unfortunately, the footage got destroyed. For some reason, OBS just completely pooped the bed, and all that footage was like at 2 FPS. But we did have some games of Planetary Annihilation, and it was a lot of fun. So if you want to get in on that, join the community Discord. I hope to see you over there. Thank you everyone again so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.